Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a couple cards I made for last week's Color Throwdown Challenge. And because of a million things, didn't get the video edited till now, but I'll still have a link to the challenge in my blog post, which will be linked directly below the video, because you can always check it out for inspiration and to see what the team made and what other people made. And there's a new challenge every Wednesday. So I started off with Simon Says Stamp's new Peony background because, man, in a recent video I used, and now my brain stopped, but the other large floral set that had come out in Simon's May release. And this background goes perfectly with it, of course, because they're both designed by Emily Midget, and she makes these beautiful floral images, and they're all my favorite. Always large florals. Who'da thunk? So anyway, I just put the stamp face up on my work surface. And I started with Simon's Carnation Positively Saturated ink. I inked up the stamp. And then I took a blending brush and I blended off sort of the what'll be the top, basically kind of creating an ombre in a sense, because it's kind of full strength at the bottom and then it fades towards the top. And you could stop here. This looks like great. You know, you could add a sentiment and it's great. Add some splatter and some bling. You know the rules. But anyway, I wanted to blend on top of this though. And this was fun. I can't remember whose cards I saw before this. I think it might have even been in the release images, something, but I was like, oh, I really loved the idea of like just any background. It doesn't have to be like this one. It would look great with a geometric one, anything. Just taking a background stamp, stamping it in whatever color, and then using that same color and blending on top. And it just creates a really neat effect. And when you're using the exact same ink, especially these positively saturated inks, as these inks dry, and I've mentioned this before, they do smooth out. Like, you don't need to be an expert blender by any means. One, I'm not, mostly because I'm just way too impatient. But when these dry, they're all like so smooth, you know? And I added extra ink on the bottom. I'm using the exact same ink, the same carnation color, and I'm just, again, applying it heavier at the bottom and then just fading it out towards the top. And it just works. And the funny thing is like, for the most part, you don't see a lot of this because I use a really large die cut sentiment, but the idea was there and I was having fun. And then I was like, I think I'm gonna have to do this again with the same background probably, and then also other backgrounds, because I really liked the look of it. And it's just a fun way to get a different look with just one color of ink. You know, you don't need all the things. I'm trying really, like I always say to everyone, like, do as I say, not as I do, because this is coming from the person who needs every single color of everything in every formula, and you know what I mean. Anyway, I did those two backgrounds, which will be my card fronts. For the inside of the card, I'm using that same ink, but this time I'm applying the ink to the stamp only with the blending brush because I want it lighter. I don't want the full strength because this is going on the inside of the card, so I want it just a little bit softer. So I just inked up the brush and applied it, and I've shown this with other stamps over the years using either blending brushes or my blending foams. Any of those things work. And it just gives a different look. And this is also a nice way too if you want to use multiple colors, because you can get a nice blended look. But I was just going for a little bit softer. And this also solves the bit of a dilemma of me covering up most of the card front. Then you open up the card and you get to see the pretty design. So my card bases are top folding A2 white note cards. And then I had put some Post-it tape right at the score line so I don't stamp past the score line on the inside of the card. Same procedure, have the stamp face up on my desk. You can use a MISTI, a stamp positioner for this. That works just great too, especially if you're not as comfortable. This is old school. Like, this was how we used to use background stamps before the MISTI became a thing and completely changed the game. And it's still a habit. It just depends on my mood, whether I pull it out or not for stamping like this. And yeah, so did the same thing. inked up the stamp with my Carnation ink and the blending brush, and then set those aside. So then for my main like focus of these cards, it's the, I can't even say it like hey girl hey, it's hey girl hey wafer die set that Simon released. It's in my head. It's just hey girl hey. It's actually just called Hey Girl, but you know what I mean. So the outline I die cut from white cardstock. And onto that, I'm blending Simon's LIMELICIOUS ink and doing sort of the same thing, keeping it a little more concentrated towards the bottom and then fading it out as I get closer to the top. I've got a little bit of Post-it tape there to protect the cardstock from getting any fingerprints, because these are water reactive inks. Fingerprints happen. It's better to be safe than sorry. So very simple blending. And again, as it dries, it just becomes completely smooth. And I love it. So that was the background, or like the outline for the wafer dies. And then the actual words I die cut from a bunch of scraps of white cardstock. And adhering these, it's like a puzzle, honestly. And I just found the easiest way is I started with the main, like the first H, just to get it in place. And then I put the scripty girl word down because it just fits right in there. And then once those are in place, everything else just fits around it. It just literally like a puzzle. So there are little bits with this specific wafer die set that you can see like the center of the scripty R is actually like the back of the E. It all kind of makes sense once you apply it once. That said, some of the teeny tiny little pieces you don't need to worry about. Like, it's not the end of the world. I did it because my OCD was just like, no, you are doing all the little pieces just because you have to. But again, it was just, it literally, it's like a puzzle. It just worked. So I went along and just adhered just the first layer, like the actual full die cut words. And for the littler pieces, that's where my little reverse tweezers came in handy. My little embellishment wand, I just used like the little metal end to like press pieces into place, that sort of a thing. And my craft tacky glue, which I have in that little Gina K precision bottle. I'll have a link to that in the supplies. People have been asking me about that. I use Simon Says Stamp's craft tacky glue. I've been using it for years. It is a very thick glue. Again, to each their own. Some people don't like it. I do. If your glue, regardless of brand, if you find your glue's getting thicker over time, that's just natural because the more air that gets in the bottle, the more it's going to thicken up. If your glue is starting to thicken, you can add a drop or two. And I mean literally like a drop or two of distilled water, not tap water, distilled water. You don't want it, you don't want to be adding tap water stuff because it can get funky. If it's sitting for long periods of time. But you add only a drop or two, shake it up really well, that thins it out. You do not want to add a bunch of water to your glue because then you're literally ruining the glue. You're going to thin it out so much, it ain't going to stick anymore. But I don't have to do that very often, but every once in a while sometimes with my glue, especially because I'm really bad sometimes about leaving the regular bottle, leaving it sitting open. Anyway, that's what I use in this little Gina K precision bottle. But Gina K's glue is great as well. There's Lawn Fawn glue. There's Honeybee Stamps has a really great glue. Studio Claudia has a really great glue. There's a bunch of other ones on the market. Barely Arts glue is really popular as well. I have it. I don't reach for it because I'm just, I reach for the same thing. Anyway, enough about the glue. I stacked the girl word with white cardstock. More die cuts. And the top layer was Simon's Flamingo glitter paper. Oh, chef's kiss. I forgot I had that. And then I was like looking for, glitter paper to go with my card and flipping through my stash. And I was like, oh yes, I had a full brand new pack of this stuff. Love. So that's what I did for the top layer. So it just gave it that extra something. And then, because I love this glitter cardstock so much, I pulled out, this is an oldie but goodie die set. This die set came out years ago. This is the Frames die set. My goodness, this one's been out for almost a decade. It's still available. Love it. Anyway, any narrow frame when you're adhering. what helps, and I've shown this in videos in the past, it's been a while since I've used this one. I took the center portion of that die cut, because I'm obviously going to save that. It's going to go back in the packaging with the glitter cardstock. But I temporarily taped it into place. Exactly, like centered it on those backgrounds. Then that little narrow frame of the glitter cardstock, I used my craft tacky glue on. And then that center piece was just my guide, because when you're dealing with little thin frame die cuts, they just want to go everywhere. And especially if it's like a rectangle or a square shape, straight edges, not fun to line up. But this makes it a million times easier, because it just is the guide. So I just rolled up a couple pieces of just easy C tape, just something easy and removable, to stick that rectangle onto the center of those backgrounds. And then just little dots, very thin lines of craft tacky glue here on the back of this narrow little frame. And then that way I can lift this up, stick it into place, and like push it up right against that cardstock. So then I know it's straight, it's centered. So much easier, so much easier. And then I can remove the rectangle of glitter cardstock, and like I said, those go back in the package. Those will be for future projects. So then I've got that nice little frame of that pink Flamingo glitter cardstock. And then for the main sentiment, I put Simon's Big Mama foam tape on the back of these pieces to give it just a little bit of dimension. It pops it up a tiny little bit, but it doesn't add a bunch of bulk. So I stuck that on the back, and then I'm going to center that and pop that onto these card fronts. And then once these are popped into place, I'm going to go back to the insides of my cards, because I could have just left it with just the floral image because it's gorgeous, but I wanted to add a sentiment to the inside as well. So I'm using the new Elegantly Modern Greetings. This one's going to be another favorite, that is for sure. So I pulled that out, and I have some more smooth white cardstock here. I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to ink up the thanks sentiment. I just put that on an acrylic block as well. At this point, I had so much stuff on my desk I couldn't pull out my Misty even if I wanted to. But Misty would have helped, because I managed to drop the acrylic block right there. You can't see it, but it did get the embossing ink on there, so it ruined that. But cardstock has two sides. Flipped it over, repeated the process. Anti-static powder tool, inked up the stamp with clear embossing ink, stamped it a couple times onto the cardstock. I'm going to coat this with clear embossing powder. Once I've got that coated, tap off the excess. I'm going to melt this with my heat tool until it is smooth and shiny, and always tilting it back and forth in the light to make sure there's no dull grainy areas. Once that's done, I'm going to just trim this out quickly from this big piece of cardstock, because I don't want to get ink over the rest of it, because I'll use it for other projects. And I'm going to just ink blend right over top of this with that same LIMELICIOUS ink. And because the sentiments were clear heat embossed, they will resist the ink. Some ink is still sitting there though, just normal. So I just take my little microfiber cloth and quickly wipe over this, and that removes any of the ink sitting on top of the sentiments. They're good to go. So then I can use the coordinating wafer dies to die cut these sentiments from the cardstock. So I've got those lined up. Use that same those little bits of tape I was using to hold down the glitter paper. Ran that through my die cut machine. Got those die cut. And then to finish off the sentiment on the inside of the cards, I'm using a little sub sentiment from that same Elegantly Modern Greetings set. And I'm using Peony ink instead of the Carnation, just slightly darker, so it shows up a little bit better. And I'm stamping that with an acrylic block as well. At this point, especially on the inside of the cards, I'm not as stressed out about it. So it's like, ooh, I can generally line it up. However, I also did that with the knowledge if I mess it up, I'll just adhere the thanks on top of it. Or I'll stamp it on a separate piece of cardstock, trim it out, adhere it on top. There's always ways to fix it. So thankfully, managed to line it up both times. Shocker. Doesn't always happen that way. And stamp those sentiments onto the insides of the cards, and then adhered the die cut sentiment right above it. And then once that was adhered, I can then adhere my card fronts to the card bases. And I didn't trim down those blended card fronts. I didn't want to trim down any of it because I didn't want to, like, one, take away any of the design, and also because that Hey Girl die cut is so big. So they're going to completely cover these card bases, and I'm just going to pop them into place with craft tacky glue. As always, a person could stop here, but of course I had bling that matched. I actually had to kind of dive through my stash a bit to find just the right shade of green, and I did. I got these are little things from Lucy's cards. These are Lime Mix Jewels, and they were just the perfect shade of green. So I'm going to sprinkle just a few of these onto the cards, just to give them that little extra something. I've got the color and the glitter paper and the dimensions, so just a little bit of bling was the final touch. So a few of these, and once I had those kind of laid out, I always start with one card, kind of lay them out, figure out how I want it to go, and then I just copy it onto however many, cards I'm making in a sitting. And once those are in place, I'm going to adhere them in place with just little dabs of that craft tacky glue, picking them up with my embellishment wand, pressing them into place, and that's going to finish off both these cards. So once these were done, that was it. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. Like I mentioned earlier, I will link to that challenge in my blog post. So just check out the description box below for that. And I'll have my supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I used. You can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting. I know I joke about this a lot, but it's the legit truth. Thumbs upping and commenting, it tells the robot overlords, you guys like what you're seeing, the engagement. It helps. It just helps. And I appreciate it. So thank you all so very much. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.